Shalom and welcome to another lesson in our series of studies in the book of Joshua. People of Israel are coming home. Today we are studying chapter 22, Perek Kavbet. Chapter 22 deals with the story of the tribes of Gad and Reuven. We finished the story, as we recall, conquering the land. We finished the story of settling in the land of Canaan, where all the tribes already received the portion that they deserve for their tribe. And now, Joshua calls upon the tribes of Gad and Reuven and half of Menashe. Joshua summoned the Reuvenites and the Gadi and half the tribe of Menashe. He said to them, "Vayomer Elohim, Atem shmartem et kol asher tzivah etchem Moshe eved Adonai, v'tishme'u b'koli l'kol asher tzivah etchem." You obeyed everything that Moses told you. You observed your promise to Moses, and therefore, the time has come for you to return. What promise? The promise of not abandoning their brothers while they're capturing the land of Canaan. Verse 3, you have not forsaken your brothers all this time, until this very day. You have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God, Hashem. And now, Ve'ata, Heiniach Adonai Elohechem Lechem Kasher Diber Lehem. God, Hashem, has given your brethren, all the other tribes, what He has told them. Now, you can turn and go back to your tents. The story of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven brings us back to two previous times where this story is mentioned. The first is, of course, in the beginning of the book of Joshua, in chapter 1, verse 12. To the Reuvenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Menashe, Joshua spoke, saying as follows: "Don't forget what you promised Moshe Eved Adonai, Moses the slave of God, and that you will come here and help the other tribes capture the land, and then you will be able to go back to your land on the other side of the Jordan River." The promise that was given to Moses appears in the book of Numbers, chapter 32, Perek Lamed Bet. And I think, and I believe that in order to understand that what is going on in our chapter, we have to read through the story as it appears in Numbers chapter 32. The descendants of Reuven and the descendants of Gad had much livestock. Mikneh rav haya. They had livestock. And they saw the land of Yazer, Gilad, and they see that this area is good place for their sheep and goats. And they approached Moses and they said, "Please, if you agree, the land that Hashem struck down for the community of Israel, the land that is really fit for what we own, for our livestock. If we have found favor in your eyes, let us receive this land, and don't bring us over to the Jordan River." And Moses attacks them strongly, and he says, "What are you doing? Should your brothers come to war while you stay here? Why are you discouraging the children of Israel from crossing to the land that Hashem has given them?" And he bitterly attacks them. And finally, they answer, of course, "What are you? No, you misunderstood us completely, Moshe. We didn't mean we were going to leave the land, the people. We will go ahead in front of the people. We will turn ourselves quickly ahead of the children of Israel and help them capture the land, and then we will return to our livestock and to our children and families." And this is the promise they promised Moses. But if we a little more deeply learn the chapter there, we see that Moses didn't misunderstand what Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven meant, Actually, he understood exactly. But he pointed out to them two important points. The first point, we see, when the families of Gad and Reuven approach Moses, they say to him, listen, we have much herds of sheep and goats. And let's read exactly what they say. Umikne rav haya livnei Reuven, and they want, let us have this part of the land. Moses comes back to them and says, or let's read a little further in verse 16, they say, Vayigshu elav vayomru, they approached him and said, we will build sheep pens for our livestock and cities for our young children. Moses hears this sentence and he says, guys, don't you realize that there's something wrong with what you just said? You want to build sheep pens and then you want to build cities for young children? Maybe first think about your children and then about the sheep pens. When they answer him, they accept what he said, and they answer, what did he say? In verse 24, verse Pasuk Kavdal, B'nu lachem arim letapchem ugderot letzonachem. Build cities for your children and sheep pens for your livestock. They accept that. And in verse 31, when they answer, they say, that's exactly what they say. Vayanu b'nei Gad uvnei Reuven lemor, and they answer him as follows. And what do they say? They say to Moses, this is exactly what we will do. We will build, if we read in verse 26, Tapeinu nashenu miknenu v'chol bentenu, our children and our wives and our animals will be there in the cities of God. So meaning they understand the first message that Moses told them. First refer to their children and then refer to their property. But Moses points out one more point, and this is even more important. They come and they say in verse 17, "Ve'anachnu nechalei tzchushim lifnei bnei Yisrael." We will arm ourselves quickly and go ahead of the children of Israel. Moses says to them, you guys, you're misunderstanding something very important. Capturing and settling in the land of Israel is not just finding a solution for your animals and your children. And this is what he says. Vayomer Alehem Moshe, in verse 20, Moshe says that if you should do this thing, if you arm yourself before Hashem, lifnei Hashem. Again in verse 21, every armed man among you will cross the Jordan before Hashem. Verse 22, the land will be conquered before Hashem. He emphasizes lifnei Hashem, before Hashem. When they answer him, they answer as follows. In verse 27, Avadecha ya'avdu kol chalutz tzava lifnei Hashem. They accept upon themselves, as it says in verse 27, your servants will cross all the armed forces before Hashem for battle as our master is over. So they come and they say, we are ready to go ahead in front of Hashem. Now let us return to the story that happens in our chapter. Joshua says to them, you can go back to your city. They go back to the city and they build an altar. Vayavo, I'm reading in verse 10. They come, Vayavo el glilot hayarden. They come to the region of the Jordan, meaning to the eastern side of the Jordan River. Vayivnu sham bnei Reuven uvnei Gad v'chatish sham mizbeach al hayarden, mizbeach gadol limar'eh. They built an altar opposite the land of Canaan. The people of Israel go out of their minds. What are you guys doing? Then they send messengers. They send a whole delegate of people to go talk to the people of Bnei Gad and Reuven. What do they say to them? Vayishlechu bnei Reuven, bnei Israel, bnei Reuven, bnei Gad el Chatish Menashe. Vayavo, in verse 15. El bnei Reuven v'chati Sheva Manasseh v'ko amar Adonai al datnai ma ha'ma'al hazeh asher me'altem. What is this treachery that you have committed against the God of Israel? Are you building an altar to rebel? This, and then they remind two sins that happened in the past. And they say to them, Hame'at lanu et avon peor, verse 17. Don't you remember the sin of Peor? Is that not enough for us? And then they say, in verse 20, they remind another sin. Halo Achan ben Zerach. Did not Achan, the son of Zerach, commit treachery again regarding the consecrated property? And anger was directed against the entire community of Israel. What are these two sins that they're mentioning? They're mentioning the story of Peor, which appears in the book of Numbers. In the book of Numbers, in chapter 25, where the people of Israel are sitting in Shittim, and the people start to act immorally with the daughters of Moab. When we learn the story there, we see that the tribe that was involved there was the tribe of Shimon. The tribe of Shimon, who were not supposedly to get a part in the land of Israel. And if we recall, in the beginning of the book of Numbers, when there are the flags of the tribes around the tents, there is one of the second group of tribes consists of Bnei Reuven, Bnei Shimon, and Bnei Gad. There's Reuven and Gad and Shimon. Shimon were the family that were not going to get part of the land. They're sitting there on the other side of the Jordan River, and they find themselves not involved in getting ready to capture the land because they feel they're not part of it. And they are the ones that behave immorally with the daughters of Moab. Instead of Shimon comes in Menashe. If we see the two times that they counted the people of Israel in the beginning of the book of Numbers, and then later on in the book of Numbers, we see that almost all the tribes pretty much stay the same. Just Shimon goes down and Menashe goes up, and this is what Jacob promises the tribes of Menashe and Ephraim. Kir Uvein and Shimon, they will be like Reuven and Shimon. Ephraim, who is considered the firstborn, as Reuven, and Menashe as Shimon. So here, they are coming here, and we're saying to them, don't be like Shimon, don't be like that tribe that sinned in Peor. This is what happened to them. They were erased. Don't be like that tribe, just because you're sitting on the other side of the Jordan River. And the second point what they mentioned is the sin of Achan ben Zerach. This is the story of Achan, who right after they crossed the Jordan River in the first war in Jericho, he takes something for themselves. And in this sin we learned the responsibility, even if one person sins, the anger of God is against all the nation. If you think you're going to be living on the other side of the Jordan River and you're going to be on your own and you're going to separate yourself from the people of Israel, we're all going to be suffering for that. So they remind them the two sins of Peor and Achan. Peor, the sin of the tribe that felt themselves not part of the people. And the sin of Achan, who we learn from here, that in Israel, in the land of God, the responsibility is of everybody over the entire nation. What do they answer them? Vayanu bnei Reuven bnei Gad in verse 21. Don't worry. The whole idea of this altar, Livnot lanu mizbeach 23, Lashuv me'acharei Adonai. Don't think we are going to against God. Acharei Adonai, which is the opposite of Lifnei Adonai. Don't think, no, God forbid. Vice versa. The whole idea, the whole intention of this altar is saying to ourselves, in the future, our children might say that we have two separate nations. So the altar we're building on the Jordan River, if we recall, when the people of Israel cross and God dries the Jordan River, he says to them that the Jordan River is supposedly is a border. No, it can be erased. The altar, just like those stones that Joshua built on the river, are come to say that God unites the nation. On that border, the border is not a division. This altar is here to say that we are in front of Hashem. We are here as part of the entire nation, and not as you were afraid that we are separating. And therefore the tribe of Menashe, which is also has half on one side and half on the other side, helped unite Reuven and Gad with the entire nation. And here they are announcing and declaring in front of God and in front of the people that here we are, all one nation. Even though part is on one side of the Jordan River and the other part is on the other side, we are all one nation with one intention: to settle in the land of God, in front of God, to announce God's presence to the entire world as one nation of Israel. Shalom.